Hi everyone, welcome to Digital Groove Online, a brand new YouTube channel where I will give out production tips, tricks and breakdowns of tracks. The first series of videos that I'm going to concentrate on are aimed at absolute beginners. I'm going to take you through Ableton Live. I'm using version 12 and take you through all the functionality in the first video to understand what everything does from a basic point of view. I'm not going to cover absolutely everything. I don't want your head spinning in the first session, but what we will do is go through everything that I find relevant to beginners so that we can get something out of the workstation come the end. When we first open up Ableton Live, we will be presented with this screen. This screen is called Session View, and when Session View opens, it will give us a couple of channels of MIDI and audio. Just before we go into every feature that I found will be useful for a beginner, I just want to talk about the version of Live that I'm on. So I am on Ableton Live Standard. Ableton Live Standard has the full functionality of Ableton Live Suite, which is the very, very top application, minus a few audio effects, instruments, Max for Live, and sample banks once you purchase that license. If you're not sure which version to go for, we can load up the Ableton site, which I've got preloaded here. And at the Ableton Live side, just under Live, we have Compare Editions. And under the right-hand side, we have Intro, Suite, and Standard here. Underneath Intro, you can see that functionality is limited. But the other two versions, it has the full functionality, albeit that Suite has a few additional features. The functionality is still the same. When we scroll down, it starts to compare what we can use within Ableton Live. And the further we go down that list, we start to see even Standard. You don't get Max for Live with Standard. And the software instruments, if we start going down, you can see the Standard stops around this tension plugin. And then bass operator, things like that. We don't get that with the Standard version, where you get a little bit more with Live. But I don't see what I use it for. I use third-party plugins as well. It's not really beneficial for me to jump up to the Suite Edition. Standard is enough. Now, if you're going to follow along, you might come across some functionality differences if you're working with Ableton Live Intro. There are limitations. For example, the software instruments and channels, you can only load up to 8. But if you're unsure, you can go to the website and compare those editions. If you're following along, I recommend that you're on at least Ableton Live Standard. So jumping back in, as I said, you are preloaded with a couple of MIDI tracks and a couple of audio tracks. And MIDI basically is where you draw in information and you get it to trigger an instrument or device depending on what you're telling it to do. And audio is pre-recorded pieces of music which can be manipulated in ways like pitching, chopping, and things like that. There's more flexibility with MIDI, but the further we go into these sessions, you will understand the difference. I just jumping up the top left-hand corner of the screen. The first button I'm going to come across is tap. Now, if I click my mouse on tap 4 times, you can see to the right-hand side of that, this number changes. This is your beats per minute. You'll hear it referred to as BPM. Now, depending on the genre of music that you're making, whether it be house music, trance music, techno, there isn't sort of an ideal beats per minute that they work in. For example, house music can be anywhere between 115, 118, up to 120 plus slightly, and trance music 135 to 142, and so on. Now, rather than tap it in, you can click on this, which is what I tend to do, and type in your preferred beats per minute. For me, I produce house music, melodic house music, so the beats per minute that I would typically work around would be 124 beats per minute, and we can hit enter, and that will then put in the beats per minute for this project tempo. The next button sort of relevant would be the metronome. If we click on that and hit play, that is the tempo of 124 beats per minute. And if we speed that up or slow it down, the metronome will keep in time with the beats per minute of the project. Now, what will we use that for? That would be for keeping in time. Maybe a vocalist plays a click track through their headphones and they can keep in time with the music. A drummer might use it, or maybe we're playing in a melody on a keyboard and we want to keep in time with the track. Maybe it's the first element that you've put into your track, or we're playing some piano keys with the keyboard and we turn on the metronome to try and keep in time. It's not used all the time, but it's there if you want to use it. After that, this is a brand new function within Live 12, and this is where we can set the key and scale of the track. If we want to set the key and scale, it's as simple as this, using this drop down. We want to work in A minor, for example. We select A, and then we select minor from the scale, and this will then keep the track in the scale of A minor. Now, what does that look like? Let's say we're drawing in something. We've got an instrument on this channel. We don't at the minute, but let's say we have an instrument on it. If I double click on this box here, the piano roll will come up here. And these are all the keys that are on the keyboard. But on the A minor scale, anything that's this little purple pinky color is within that scale. So we can't go wrong. If I change that to a C minor, for example, the purple notes will change within the piano roll itself. As you've seen, it changed at the bottom there. We'll keep that on A minor. And that just means that you can keep in scale if you are not trained in any way with regards to me. Okay. Little button here. We'll just minimize and put that down to the bottom. Now, session view, and if I just use the tab button, this is called arrangement view. Arrangement view is your typical view most producers will use. It's a linear view. It goes from left to right, and this little bar that you can see in the middle of the screen is it's the timestamp. So if I hit play again, turn off the metronome, we'll just hit play, you can see it's starting to move from left to right. Now when we drop pieces of music in here, it basically plays that music as it moves along it. Ableton Live was one of the first companies to bring out session view, and that allows us to drop clips into this area here and trigger those loops. Now you can trigger those loops individually, or we can create what's called scenes. Now if you look over to the side here, we've got scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, scene 4. And what that might look like, if I just rename this, we could call this one intro. Rename this, we could call that chorus. Rename this one, we could call it drop. Rename this one, we could call it breakdown, right? And what we can do then is, in this scene 1, we can create what sounds like an intro. You know, loops that sound like an intro. Then we can duplicate that down to the next one, call it the chorus. The chorus might have breakbeats in the middle of it with a vocal over the top of it, and so on. You create these little scenes the whole way down. And how we trigger those scenes is by hitting play. We can start with the intro and go straight into the drop, and then go to the chorus, and then go to the breakdown, and then go back to the drop. And you can sort of create a little remix on the fly. I don't tend to use it, but it is there to use. It was the first of its kind, and it's aimed more towards live performances. Arrangement view, as I said, is the most typical view that I use, and this is what we will be focusing on throughout these series of videos. Now, just before I move on, I'm going to go down the library section, but just before I get there, I just want to point out that your mixer section just at the bottom here, if we hover in between this line, we can drag this up, okay, and I can control the mixer volume here. Or if I tab to the arrangement view, just move myself out of the way, we can also move the faders here as well on this side, and it will correspond when we go back here. I typically like coming back to this view to look at it. If you like to have the mixer view on this section here and work completely within that window, there's a new feature within Ableton 12 that now allows you to do that by clicking this button in the bottom right hand corner, and it brings up your mixer on this view. Previous versions this wasn't available. I've been using Ableton a long time, so I am quite used to going back and tabbing into the other screen to work within the mixer window. These little buttons along the bottom here turn that channel on and off. So if we drag a sample in here and we play that piece of music, we can turn it off and on from here, so we don't have to listen to it. The S button just below that is a solo button, and you can solo that track. If you want to hear more than one track, we can hold down Control and click the button beside it, and now we can hear those two playing and the rest of the music is blanked out, which is beneficial if you just want to isolate one or two instruments and listen to them playing together. The button just below that is Record Arm, and when we turn that on and we have a keyboard attached to our computer and we play an instrument, we will be able to hear that coming out the speakers. Just moving on from the bar along the top, after the key is set, we have this section here. If I tab back to the arrangement view and hit play again, it starts at bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, and so on. And if we move over, those are your beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it keeps moving up the bars, and then this goes down into smaller increments again. By hitting the space bar, it starts and stops what you're listening to, and you can see the little play marker coming on and off. This is a stop button as well, which will bring you back to the start of the project, and this is your record button. I will skip some of these features here and talk about that later on. As we move over here, this pencil tool will allow you to draw things into your project, whether it be drum grooves, automation. We can use this pencil to do it. The next thing across is the keyboard. When we have that turned on and we have an instrument attached to one of these channels, using the keyboard that you type with, you can use the letter A up to around L, I think from memory, to play the instrument that's attached to that if you don't have a keyboard or a MIDI keyboard attached to your computer. These little buttons here we're going to pass over as well. The next one I'm going to look at is where it says 44.1 kilohertz. When I click on that, it brings up the settings tab and you're automatically within the audio tab. This is very important when you're starting out. If you've just got a laptop, Ableton Live, and you just want to get going, the default settings are probably okay. You can plug your headphones in and go ahead. If you have a sound card that you want to attach and run your headphones off or set speakers off, then you'll need to install the drivers that come with that sound card. And then from there, when you come into the audio section, we then pick ASIO, and the make of the sound card that you have will be the audio output. The reason I don't have mine set at the minute is because I'm recording this video, but I have a Roland sound card and I normally have it set to that when I'm producing music myself. Now over on the left hand side, we have a library function, and that library function is for Ableton Live instruments, audio effects, and a few other things. So we'll just go through that now. This little all section, anything that you want to search for that you use within Ableton, you can click on all and start the search up at the top. There is an instrument built into Ableton called Drum Rack, and you get that, part of the package, and it is a pad sequencer, I suppose. When I type in Drum Rack, there we go, there's Drum Space Rack. You'll see it comes to the top, and I can drag it onto this MIDI channel at the top and drop it. And basically I can load individual samples into here and trigger each pad to make that sound come out of the computer. Anything you're searching for, I normally have it on all. If it's called a VST, a virtual instrument, I like to use Serum. If I type in Serum, it will come up here, and we can drag and drop that onto the MIDI channel as well, and we can load that plugin onto our screen. I'm going to just delete that for now, but this all is great for searching. The next one down is sounds. I'll just take off my filters from before and go on to sounds. These are sounds that are pre-made and they're in Ableton ready for you to use. Please feel free to look through them. Some of them are really good. And if I just drag, for example, this voice onto the MIDI channel, and we spoke about earlier on being able to play using our keyboard that we type with. If I just turn on this keyboard button, and hit the letter A, we can then audition that sound. If this is not turned on, it will not let us play it. I'm trying to hit it now, and it's just A brings up the automation lanes, which is a little bit further down the line, but we can't play that. So if you don't hear anything, you hit the letter A whenever this is turned on. The next one down is drums, and these are drum kits that come with Ableton Live. Again, feel free to experiment with them. I'll drag a kit on, for example, into the MIDI lane, and inside this kit there are pre-made sounds, and we can use those sounds and trigger those sounds using MIDI in one of the next sessions. The next one down is instruments. These instruments are pre-made by Ableton. They come with your application, and some of my go-to will be Simpler, Drum Rack, and Log as well. If we drag that out, you'll see it's Simpler. Simpler is just a sampler, and we can put audio files into that and do various things with that audio file inside that instrument. These are free with Ableton. Like instruments, there is an audio effects section, and inside the audio effects section, these again are all made by Ableton, which are inside your workstation that you can use. Some of the go-to ones I use will be compressor, EQ8, reverb, delay, things like that, and we just drag them out onto our MIDI channels again, and we can use those within our project. The MIDI effects button are effects that we can apply to MIDI channels. Pitch is a really good one for shifting up and down an octave at a time. An octave is just the same note, only pitched 12 semitones higher or lower. Modulators, I like to use the LFO within here, but it's a little bit more advanced. We'll skip over that for now and use it further down the line. Plugin section. These are third-party plugins. These are not made by Ableton. They're made by companies that are not Ableton third parties, and they make them compatible with different workstations, whether it be Ableton, FL Studio, Cubase, you name it. These companies make it for them. Now, I have quite a few there, but honestly, I could probably name 5 that I probably use on a day-to-day basis. Get to know your tools. The next one down is clips. They're a little bit like the drums, where there's drum kits. These are ready-made clips from those drum kits. If I drag one of those clips in, it will load the drum kit, but also has patterns already made inside it. So if I just hit play, if you want to see the information that's being triggered, if we double click on this MIDI clip, you will see that this is what's playing back. You can also manipulate this by adding, taking away, building your own rhythms, for example. But just to show you how easy it is, let's take out the bass drum. We do that by clicking on the bass drum key, and it highlights the whole row, and click delete, and there we have taken out the bass drum. If you want to make that more of a house beat, we draw on kick drum, and just duplicate that by hitting Control D. So we have the flexibility to manipulate that groove. So feel free to play with that as well. These little arrows here just hide that out of the road. This little sample looks through the samples that are available to you within inside the application, whether that be sample banks that are on your hard drive or samples that are within Ableton itself. Grooves a little bit more advanced further down the line, and also tunings and templates. Okay. Section whenever you sign into Ableton or load the Ableton application will be blank. All this is a quick access bar. So if I have samples on my hard drive, rather than me opening up my Windows Explorer or Mac or whatever you're using and finding the location of the sample banks and clicking on them individually, letting them play through a media player, oh I like that one, and dragging it in, what we can do is go to the add folder button at the bottom, locate the folder and click select that folder, and it will pop it into this area here. This is one I've already mapped, and that has my samples that are on my hard drive in here for quick access. So if I want to go into this Deep Premium 4 percussion loops, I can now browse them. I can now browse them within here without having to go into my hard drive to look for them. So that's another good thing. Just along the bottom, you'll see these little arrows that have been hitting. That expands and hides these sections at the bottom. And again, up in the top left-hand corner, you can see this little yellow button, and that will hide the Explorer browser there on the left-hand side. Just one other thing to point out, two, up in the right-hand corner here, just after where the settings for the audio drivers were, this little 1% icon is your CPU. So the CPU is the processing power that your computer will use, and the more you have going on in your project, you will start to see this rise. It's normally okay till it gets to around 90%, and then you'll hear crackles and pops, and then we can do things to round that, which we'll show later on. And very lastly, just before I finish off, in the bottom left-hand corner, we have this little eye. If I click on it, you can see it's an eye. It's an information button. So anything that I hover over inside Ableton Live, it will tell me in this window what it is. So for example, if I hover over this, you notice it says track volume. The slider is used to adjust and display the track's output. Okay. We go to the S button, solo or Q button. If we go to this button, it tells us that it's a scale or root note. This is your metronome. So it's a handy button to have on. If you're not quite sure what it is, it gives you a little bit more detail as to what you're hovering over is and what it's capable of doing. And we can turn that off again if we want to hide that by hitting this I button. Okay, that's a general overview of the Ableton Live 12 standard. We've looked over arrangement view, we've looked over session view, and we can tab. The tab button on your computer will move between the two, or up here in the far right, you can click these buttons and they do the same thing. And I think that's plenty for us. Before we move into the next video, I'm just going to cover where I get my samples from, what program I use to get my samples, and how I use it and how I navigate that. So see you in the next video.